Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a critique of Yooka Laylee. Now, as we were previously discussing the world, let us continue. A very important part to this world is being able to see the objects and characters of the world itself. There was a decent set of criticisms for banjo-kazooie in that its draw distance was relatively terrible. Let's not forget that stupid honeycomb in Treasure Trove Cove. But in Yooka Laylee I was happy to see that it never really presented an issue. Not to mention that you would not lose your progress if you were to leave a level for whatever reason. Good stuff, but let's talk a little bit about expanding the worlds. The way it works is that worlds aren't fully available before you end up expanding them. You will enter a world and you will be missing selected pieces. Why? I mean, let me make this clear, I'm not a fan of this thing to the point where I played the game as if it wasn't a thing. Basically grab 5 pages on world 1, then expand and subsequently expand each world before jumping in. The fact that this is an option is awesome and, it makes it so that I don't have to deal with this system. And, the fact that I've made my experience clear, let's talk about the point of it all. I think they intended for players to approach a world and gain X amount of collectibles and then move to the following world and do the same until they would potentially decide to return to older worlds and have the option to expand them upon re-entering. This meant they could approach the worlds in a more digestible way. They could explore the original world and then upon returning catch anything they missed, unlock certain areas with new moves, and regardless of their progress in the world, they would be unlocking brand new sections thanks to the expansion. It reminds me of the system where the camera follows you around like we discussed back in part 1, in that it seems to be a brand new system that is meant to help players and give them a guiding hand. I mean, judging from World 2's boss fight, it's clear they expect more players to return there once they have Sonar Explosion from World 3. Most commonly, this is probably how people approach the game. I didn't. I always want to get everything to the best of my ability in the areas I visit for the first time in games like this. Ultimately, this is an artificial lock-on content, but not more so than note doors in Banjo or any kind of limitation you get in any of these games. I mean, when content is locked away based on the amount of collectibles you have and you don't like that in your collectathon, well, you might want to play something else, because I don't know what value you're going to get from this. Honestly, collecting stuff is the bread and butter. So what else do people seem to have an issue with?
Was the hub world itself, which was messy and confusing and not laid out in any sort of logical manner.
I wasn't overly keen on the layout of the hub world, Ivory Towers.
The hub environment is definitely the weakest effort.
The hub world in Yooka Laylee is massive, so it's just a mess to try and get around.
You have this fucking dickhead hub world where you can't even find the next level. Seriously, who made this thing?
But its sprawling areas with hidden secrets and pathways don't quite capture the same magic.
Okay, I think you're all nuts, but here we go. The opening to the hub world is pretty dang awesome. You get blasted with color and character as well as a very straightforward story to enter you into the game itself. There is, however, very little in terms of mechanical value. You test the ability to jump, walk, and attack, and then move on to understanding crouching and swimming and finally grabbing up the rolling ability. And that's just before you're essentially set free. The main hub world is restrictive in that you require many different pieces of knowledge and abilities in order to approach certain paths. Which in terms of formula is absolutely fine, but here it felt a little bit busy. Perhaps it was the industry theming of the opening few rooms, but it took me a few seconds to acclimate to the environment and actually pick up what was there. Just needed to grab my bearings, as I made clear before. I need to identify where things are and what they require. We had a clear shortcut exit, a room closed by what would probably be a variant of the ground pound, and a ramp. Other than that, we simply had a pagey in the room, and in terms of absorbing what is here, that's it. Once I understood what the hub was telling me in terms of its personal style of design, it felt sort of homey, easy to understand. Though I must say I find it incredibly odd that you can't get the pagey that is up the ramp in the spawn area until you visit Tribal Stack Tropics. Like, it won't be there until you do that despite learning the roll ability. I feel like I mentioned it already, but it's just odd to me. Maybe it's so that it doesn't distract players who spawn in that opening area to make them think that there isn't a chance of getting that pagey at that very moment. To which I say, spawn it the minute you gain the roll ability, or, well, just fuck them. The fact that there's a ramp that you clearly can't get up should be enough of an informational piece that you're not supposed to get that pagey yet. As the hub moves along, we can see certain doors and secrets being revealed and linked together, creating a sense of a lumbering tunnel splitting off into small sections, but ultimately taking one longer path. It moves out from industrial to more of a factory to a waterworks to an open plain with pipes and toxic waste, ending up in what are bigger, stronger structures that are dedicated to the book suction process. And at the top we have the capital B building, in which he has placed a 100-pagey limit on the door in the way. As you move through, all of the 5 worlds actually bleed out onto the surrounding hub. You get given the chance to access Rextra's arcade and all the previously unlocked games. I don't know why you would want to play these again. You can grab a handful of pages that are rather interesting and require some knowledge of the mechanics you have previously learnt. like knocking over all the books to unlock one, aligning the books in the novel hovel based on sound cues, getting through the sewage tunnel, and once you gain the flight ability, all of this is very traversable and arguably very fun to explore, considering some of the secrets to be found in the hub world. Now, people are saying that the hub world lacks focus, is boring, and fundamentally confusing. Hub worlds in general are a whole thing on its own, so let's, for the sake of this series actually being able to come to an end, say that Banjo-Kazooie is the idea of a great hub world, and at the very least better than Yooka Laylee. I have a handful of issues with this. Firstly, that upon completing the game I had absolutely no problem with the hub. I mean, it ain't no Delfino Plaza, but it was serviceable and certainly matched its own themes. Once I began to hear the criticisms pour in, all I was getting was crappy buzzwords. Nobody ever gives me shit to work with here, so here we are, having to look at how these worlds connect throughout and how they compare. Both worlds have a clear beginning and ending, both require learned moves from their respective worlds to progress. However, Banjo will also require a particular amount of notes, which are equivalent of quills. Both are pagey limited by what is ultimately a hell of a lot in terms of what you have to grab in total for Banjo-Kazooie, but a decent chunk more reasonable for Yooka Laylee. Both have art designs that allow their respective worlds to spill into the main hub world. But what about the differences? Well, Banjo-Kazooie, as everyone is aware, has a lot more worlds. In fact, it has a hell of a lot more rooms too. Rooms that are pretty easy to read as you enter. Like, you see a room, notice there's only one way you came in and about 1 to 3 places to go from there, and so on, as long as you know where the remaining paths are. Upon recently playing Banjo-Kazooie again, I got a little lost just after getting the 100% on Mad Monster Mansion. So with all these observations, I decided to sketch out the worlds. The circles are essentially representing rooms, while black connectors are loading screens and whites are simply connects. A cross through a room means that there's a world in there, and the rest is just stuff to find and unlock. Now, the first thing anyone should notice is that Banjo-Kazooie's hub world is indeed bigger and it's far more linear nearer the beginning. Yooka Laylee's actually kind of simple, with most paths connecting back with ease, and the worlds don't really lead into each other as much as they are sort of sitting side by side. As I said previously, the hub world was kind of difficult to take in at first, but at this point it makes complete sense, and I appreciate the fact that the levels within it connect back in what are essentially the most logical positions. Banjo-Kazooie had a similar system in that cauldrons connect to different parts of the world, but this allowed them to be placed absolutely anywhere. And this was essentially something they were forced to do in the fact that they couldn't really curve their world back in a big circle. When you reach the endgame for both hubs, things are a lot more open and arguably more confusing, but more so for Banjo-Kazooie in that you have a winding stone and several water-rising switches to find in order to open up Click-Clock Wood, not to mention the ridiculously large amount of jiggies you're meant to find. Oh, and I just want to reaffirm, I actually think that Banjo-Kazooie is not only the best collectathon platformer, but also one of my all-time favorite games, because, as everyone knows...
I'm the platformer, man.
Wait a minute, that's the same guy who said...
And drink piss out of my ass.
No, the reason I said that was I just didn't want people to think I hate Banjo. I really don't hate Banjo, I just hate bad critics, because the huge advantage Banjo-Kazooie has over Yooka Laylee is that it's been out for fucking years. And people know this hub world. Yooka Laylee doesn't have that benefit. Yet. One day it might actually be able to be looked at in an honest way, because most if not all things I've covered here have been either average or pretty good. But anything that even represents a small chink in Yooka Laylee's armor is being lambasted by the, I don't know, the critic community. And it's just kind of funny because we all know the big issue is everyone saying something is either fantastic or terrible. We are consistently back to that once again. Ultimately, I think that the hub world in Yooka Laylee is just fucking fine. It isn't incredible, but it's definitely serviceable. They put a lot of effort into this thing and it was fun to go through. Also, did you guys notice the weird amount of random toilets you could find in the world? Yeah, I don't know. So back to the world in general. We touched on this subject and I'm going to sort of talk about it more here. Backtracking. I'm a huge fan of backtracking in games. I think it's a fun way to have a giant world at your fingertips. Create this big fuck off world and have significant areas that assist major access locked off with something that requires currency, an unlockable skill, or just skill in general. We've seen this time and time again, my personal favorites being the 2 best Metroid games. Look, it's just true, except, I don't know, they're just the best. When we had Banjo-Kazooie, I liked going around each of the individual worlds and trying to get that 100% on the first time. I treated the hub world as some sort of spine that connected them in a neat little order. This shit was really satisfying because I didn't like having to go back to specific worlds to collect specific things that added to the 100%. This only happens in Banjo-Kazooie in that you must go to either Freezeezy Peak or Gobi's Valley first in order to 100% the other. I didn't like this and it didn't need to happen. You could have just had the 2 puzzles slightly altered and then every world would have been self-contained, but it's fine. It's one interaction that as long as you can remember it doesn't change the experience much at all. It is hard to try and explain the difference between that kind of backtracking and the kind where returning to the main area in Metroid to get a new move that was locked until you get another thing in another part of the area, but the best thing I can say is that the whole world is interconnected and you keep passing by and returning to different areas as you progress through the game. While with Banjo you essentially clear and move on. There isn't much returning at all. The backtracking takes place more so within each world. It was like learning the entire layout and then moving around it and returning to certain areas in order to hit all of your goals, then returning to what is essentially a sort of main menu with some interesting bonuses. And that's not some kind of slight against the hub world, but the majority of the gameplay and the goals of collecting were focused inside the worlds. The hub simply connected them with some additional bonuses. While in Metroid there isn't a hub world and levels, it's all one world. Basically, I don't like what this results in. I have to go back to one specific world and one area in that world to perform one task to get my 100%, and it feels this way because of how these worlds are sectioned off. This is a lot more prominent in Yooka Laylee, and a lot of people like it, I guess. The funny thing was that Capital Casino is the first level that allows you to 100% upon first approach, and everyone kind of hates that level, so never mind. Look, the simple thing is I don't want you to waste my time. When you see a security camera that prevents you from entering a particular area, it screams to me that it's an arbitrary block until I get a particular move. And it's not like it opens up a whole new area like it very well might in Metroid, which has a profound effect on the atmosphere. The thing is, we know there will only be a pagey behind that wall because that is the selection of the rules this genre has to follow. This is mostly subjective, I guess, because I would argue how much better of a feeling it is when you really don't know what will happen when you open that door, or how the world is going to expand, and how even when it ends up being some kind of arbitrary bonus, it's still a better feeling than knowing you're just trying to collect that remaining pagey, and you can't because you don't have the right move. Maybe that makes sense to you guys, maybe not, but I digress. In relation to this topic, let's talk about secrets. This'll be quick, I swear. I really like secrets. Secrets that are hard to find, but not like ridiculously hard to find. This is a good example you guys probably won't know about. Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks was an incredibly awesome game, shut up. And in order to access a series of 10 challenges that could even have been played in co-op, you and or a friend would have to go to the lower level of the structure, to the back, and then to the back again, and grab the double-sided axe, then go back halfway and move left by 2 rooms and set yourself on fire, then move through to the main area and move the sort of flame blasting area and break a barrel with the axe. Then go up to the top of the area and break the barrel on the right. Do not break the one on the left. Then move through to the adjacent area and do the exact same thing. Then move through to the area with a selection of traps that slam down and break the barrel at the end of the room. Following that, you need to move back into the room you were in previously and destroy the remaining barrel, and once again with the barrel we started with in this area. Once that is done, you slam your axe on the ground that's near the last barrel destroyed, and you will unlock the entrance to survival mode, which is actually a fully realized mode with different challenges. You must do all of the things I just mentioned to a T, and if you don't get the mode. The point here is that in these games with this genre, I like secrets as much as the next guy, and I even love the ridiculous to find ones, but the game felt a little too easy in this respect. I managed to pretty much get everything, and there was a couple of areas that I honestly thought to myself, fuck, there should be a secret here surely. But there are a selection of secrets in the game that are actually pretty much on point. Finding stuff in these areas is very satisfying. Then there are the skull locations, which are pretty crazy to be honest. Finding them is not only difficult, but they lie in the areas I was talking about, the ones where you have to really think outside the box in order to find them. And it's awesome. This is what I meant by too hard, where you simply won't find them even if you try for potentially years without someone telling you. But obviously a secret like that is actually pretty awesome to find online, similar to the Painted World. Yooka Laylee was chock full of some really awesome secret collectibles and road-littered ones, I would say. So I guess overall I'm saying that the secrets that are required to get the 100% are relatively easy. They don't really put you that far out of your creative thinking, but at least they got to experiment with the things that come outside the 100%. And that's about all I have to say on the secrets, which is actually all I have to say on the world as well. So let's move on to something a little bit different. Difficulty can be done in so many ways in games that it's kind of difficult to judge it sometimes. Dying in Yooka Laylee doesn't really have an effect at all. You'll reset to the last place you entered in, even if it's a place in the opening of the level. Additionally, you'll be given full health and power back. The annoying part to it is the idea that you should definitely not want to die, as there will be a bump in your progress. Not a significant one, but if you wanted to return to the segment you were trying to overcome, you now have a small trek ahead of you as punishment. Nothing too crazy, just a small slap on the wrist for being terrible. Collectible games, in my humble opinion, can take shit a little bit too far when it comes to death, and this is a very important criticism of Banjo-Kazooie. If you died on the N64, you wouldn't lose your Jinjos or Jiggies or Honeycombs. They would be safe because they understood how difficult it was to collect them again. No, instead you would lose your note count. This meant that you would have to re-find the notes you'd already found in order to take another attempt at getting to that 100%. This is just a terrible idea, because if you got to the high 90s and then died, you would have to get them all again. They rectified this in the re-release, and the punishment for death is now kind of similar to Yooka Laylee. I guess what I think needs to be said here is that we are still worrying about how you should be punished in many games, and I think the fact that you get a minor reset in a game like this is more than reasonable, since anything more may really come across as excessive. Though I will say that because of the system working this way, when I was trying to move through a series of platforms, I ended up committing the old suicides just to get back up to the tower. Is this an exploit? Well, kinda, but I think it's an inoffensive and natural one that is clearly a result of a system that isn't meant to be overly punishing but still wants death to do something. And that's fine, I just don't know how other people feel about the subject and how they will want to bring in more punishments with more resets. So with that in mind, let's check out the biggest fights finally, shall we? The bosses. The first boss over in World 1 is the Great Rampo, who has received some interesting criticisms as we've gone over in the past, essentially amounting to people liking and hating him. His deal is that he'll throw down several logs in different patterns and you must dodge them as well as dodge the fire at the top, and then hit his teeth. Repeat this 3 times and you'll win. This boss will essentially force you to learn about the roll, namely the fact that you can stop the roll on ramps at any point and that you can zigzag in order to complete it in a fast way. They place butterflies at the entrance as well as a bit further back. As soon as you realize that you can regain the roll mid-flight by hitting the logs, the fight becomes entirely trivial, but for the first encounter it is still fun to look at and approach. People have found it ridiculously difficult and broken, but the biggest criticism is one that we've already approached in the apparent horrifying camera, which to me barely even mattered because the guy uses patterns, but like I said, it's fine. The issue we've already been over is the camera fuck-ups at the opening space before fighting him. Ultimately, a decent fight. Breeze Block is in World 2, and this is a substantially easier fight to understand. Grab the fireberry thing and burn the fucker while he tries to attack you, and move around the wall. Now, as I have alluded to, you should probably visit the world that gives you the sonar explosion before fighting him, but I didn't, since there isn't any reason that you should until you find out that you need to do it directly. This one can be pretty difficult if you don't treat it carefully. Moving around and away from his attacks is a little bit difficult, but mostly it's just a smooth and relatively easy fight that, as far as I know, only has one criticism, and that it's that he's too square and therefore similar to the Great Rampo. And I love that criticism, it just shows the barrel scraping at hand. Then there is Trev the Tentacle in World 3, who has a selection of moves that you need to dodge with jumping and swimming, sort of, effectively delivering a hit to the eye 3 times until he dies. Not very difficult, but once again a cool design and an engaging fight to break up the game. Next up is Inept, which, I mean, is just a big slap at Kinect, right? Because Microsoft relegated Rare to make shitty Kinect games. Is that what's happening here? I mean, just look at it. So Inept, the sentient short-sighted supercomputer, again, this has to be so on the nose that I just look at the things. They're so similar to Inept. Look at them. They scan you and then they try to account for your area extremely slowly. Are they trying to say that the Kinect couldn't even detect you? I mean, this has to be a giant slap to the whole Kinect thing. So he attacks you once you've managed to beat the Kartos minigame, and he has 3 phases. You got to avoid his shit. It's actually pretty neat as a development of the mechanics of the Kartos minigame, which everybody is wrong about, but we'll get to that later. Inept will spawn a pattern of explosives at you, and for every sequence you dodge, you're supposed to hit him. He will eventually spawn a sequence that you cannot dodge by simply using the jump and shoot, so you'll have to combine your knowledge with the speed ups and downs to avoid him entirely. This is a very creative boss, and despite losing to him about 4 times, I finally beat him because I paid more and more attention to the way the mechanics work. What happens when you take advantage of the speed up and slow down while jumping and attacking at the right times is that you can literally nail this shit if you actually understand the controls. We're going to get into more of that later though. Planette is the penultimate boss that requires you to be in ship form before being able to approach her. She consists of 3 sides that all pertain to a different element, that being fire, ice, and earth, and your attacks work as a sort of rock, paper, scissors variant against them. As long as you dodge her attacks and take your opportunity to strike, she goes down pretty easily, and once again has a pretty decent character design. Now, all of the bosses up to this point have had their own relevant theming within their respective worlds, as well as reasons they exist there. Combine that with the respective pacing and mechanics, it makes for a decent break within the worlds they're all set in, as well as a battle to punctuate the world. Lastly though, we have Capital B, the crowd-funded corporate creep. This fucker has 8 phases. Why does he have 8 phases? In phase 1, he'll fly to avoid you as much as possible while throwing a beehive full of bees at you. You got to avoid them for a certain amount of time, and once you pull that off, you'll have an opportunity to harm Capital B. But I found myself doing this pretty much every round since, you know, it's the best thing to do, and it became a little boring. Phase 2 is Capital B flying away from you while throwing explosives at you. Meanwhile, corporates have spawned and began running at you. You need to grab an ice berry and shoot Capital B until he gets knocked into the next phase. So the next phase, Capital B takes you to a higher area and begins slamming the ground until he gets his cane stuck and you attack him. Phase 4 is capital B slamming the ground but also throws bees at you until he can get his cane stuck in the ground and you attack him. Phase 5 is capital B slams the ground but also has another source of ground pounding happening in the background that you need to avoid until he gets his cane stuck in the ground and you attack him. Phase 6 is capital B slamming the ground as he throws bees and lets off another source of explosives until he gets his cane stuck in the ground and you attack him. Phase 7 is capital B begins to fly and launch one missile at you, which will slowly chase you around the map until you redirect it into him. The final phase is the exact same thing before, but now with more missiles. Okay, this fight is pretty damn terrible. What a boring set of repetitive nonsense. It requires such little attention from the player. Once you figure out what is essentially the best way to deal with each phase, you'll simply be doing that every time like clockwork. Assuming you get multiple restarts in the entire fight, which is likely since they don't supply you with butterflies at any point. I think they wanted to crank up the difficulty here, but they made an extremely drawn out and kind of just annoying boss. I mean, even the camera's against you. When you're flying in this segment, it is fixed so that you'll keep certain things in view, and this makes it so the game sort of forgets that I need to control Yooka and Laylee, resulting in more and more mishaps. Other than that, it isn't actually clear when you're dealing damage to capital B. He sort of gets surrounded by cartoon smoke, and I don't know, I think flashing red is the way to go with this, because for a while I really couldn't tell if he was just immune to my attacks or not. Look, why the fuck so many phases? Just why? This fight being on top of my 100% experience was so damn sad, just a completely annoying series of boring trial and error until I figured out the best and easiest way to win, and then boom, done. And you sort of sit there wondering why you're alive. I mean, it's not too much of a big deal since it's obviously just an arbitrary block to see the final cutscene to a retarded story, but it wasn't very fun. No way, I lie. The fun phase was number 5, where he threw explosives that made it so you had to jump to quickly think about, you know, actually where you're gonna land because there's so many dangers everywhere and the safe zones are changing constantly and you have to predict where the safe ground was gonna be. If the fight was just that, then I mean I would have liked it. Oh dear, it looks like I'm out of time, and my goodness, this series feels like a long one, despite every series I make feels like a long one. Next time we're going to carry on talking about some of the difficulty, but we must tackle the horrifying topic, the one that's pissed off so many reviewers, the one that has practically brought the game down to its knees in terms of pacing, of quality, of everything. The malicious, the terrifying quiz.